Okay, and we are live. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Strange Readings. Today, I have a guest. Her name is Marika Dawkins. She works at the UTRGV. Would you like to tell us about yourself?
Sure. I'm actually an associate professor in the Department of Criminal Justice, and I currently teach both undergraduate and graduate courses. And most of my research focuses on juvenile delinquency, juvenile offenders, and generally and broadly crime and justice issues in the Caribbean.
All right, awesome. It sounds very interesting. Are there any classes you're currently teaching this semester?
Yes, I'm teaching three different courses, research methods, a course in juvenile delinquency, and a course in corrections. So a lot of focus on individuals involved in the justice system.
All right, awesome. What brought you into this? What had you interested in going into this kind of world?
I love learning and reading about new cases and actually looking at issues from different angles. And when this idea was brought to me, I thought, okay, this is a wonderful opportunity to have a conversation with someone who is just as passionate about certain issues as I
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's something I feel kind of when I'm working in a library, just sharing similar passions and things like that. Yeah, before we get started, I do want to get a disclaimer that opinions, thoughts, and/or views expressed are solely those of Professor Dawkins and not necessarily of the Department of Criminal Justice and/or UTRGV. And this is a PG-13 warning. If you are under 13, please go do something else. We are going to talk about some serious issues. We're going to try to be very respectful, of course, but it is a heavy subject matter. All right, are you ready to get started?
Yes, I'm excited to talk about this this case that I find quite
Mhm.
fascinating, and there's so many
Mhm.
different aspects and angles to look at the issue
Mhm.
from. So yes.
Definitely. So the case we're talking about, everyone, is the case of Ricky McCormick and some notes that were found on his body. So let me go ahead and share the screen. And okay, it can be shown. So we can go starting with who was Ricky McCormick? If I could go to the first step. There you go. So this is the only photo I could find of him throughout the whole internet. Like, it's yeah, this is all I could find, and I guess it's kind of a contrast. Usually, like I find a lot of photos of a person involved in a case, but in this scenario, it's unfortunately a mugshot of him. So, and Ricky is a very interesting character. I couldn't find his birth date except that he was born in 1958. And so he was around his early 40s at the time he died in 1999. So Ricky lived in the St. Louis area. He received a little education. He um, he was shown to have some learning disabilities. His cousin Charles would describe him as talking like he was in another world. His cousin personally thought he had schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. He had no siblings, but he grew up alongside his cousin Charles, like siblings. And he was the closest to his aunt Gloria McCormick. And people would say he was closer to her than his own mom. So Gloria states in the interview that one time Ricky went to a psychiatrist and he said Ricky had a brick wall in his mind. He said Ricky refused to break that wall. He didn't like the life of living poor and had an active imagination. There's been never any clear answers if he had any formal treatments for his mental health, but his family did know that he liked to live in these fantasy worlds. He would spend time telling tall tales. When he was a kid, he would stand by himself at recess for a long time. That the school would actually cause mom out of concern when he kept doing it. He eventually dropped out of Martin Luther King High School. By the time he dropped out, he could not really read or write that much. Yeah, like what's your take on all that?
Yes, I find his background to be quite fascinating, just interesting in general, because there are a lot of layers. You mentioned the mugshot, and in that mugshot, he looks a
Mhm.
little not fully there, so to speak. And then when you
Yeah.
look at his background, it's quite troubling. Um,
Mhm.
One, he wasn't doing well in school. He dropped out of school, so it begs the question, like, where were the family or the relatives to really step in or at least intervene, to
Mhm.
at least show him another path to success. And
Mhm.
so that part is, they talk about undiagnosed mental illness, but it's not clear if they try to get him as much help in terms
Mhm.
of his their concerns regarding his mental health.
Mhm.
And so that part is not clear. Um,
Mhm.
it's when he's spending so much time by himself, it suggests that he didn't have a lot of friends.
Mhm.
So that part is not normal. So there are a lot of concerns and layers as to why Ricky, for example, took the path he did, or at least ended
Yeah.
up in the situation that he did.
Yeah, I think what really stood out to me too is because I know when I grew up in school, I had a lot of teachers that would intervene and like, say like, hey, we're noticing that Allison is doing this or that. I was personally kind of similar to Ricky. Like I would stand by myself and I would like be in my own imaginary world. And they just told me just let her do art and that's that. And I keep wondering like, just how there were no professionals, but I guess because this was like he was born in 1958, so this had to be around the 60s or 70s, I think. So yeah, I
That
guess.
is, yes, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm good.
That is true. I think the concern is having teachers passing them on from one grade to the next without really stopping to say, you know what, this kid really needs some help and I cannot help this kid. Like this kid needs professional help. I think that's part of the concern. I don't think it's just that he was standing by himself because I think some people are loners. They genuinely just like to be by themselves. But it's just that it was not just that he was a loner or just always being alone. It's just that he wasn't doing well. He wasn't, learning as much as he should. And so when it starts affecting other areas, then it's probably time to say, what's going on.
Mhm.
And I think my concern or my focus on this is that, what, so many teachers pass him along. And I feel like, as a teacher, your job is to, educate,
Mhm.
to change minds, to influence in a positive way, and not just to turn a blind eye. For example, he's not doing well in a class. Perhaps it's time to recommend that he gets extra tutoring or some additional help, or, maybe ask the parents to look at the possibility that he may have a learning disability.
Mhm.
But I think just passing him on from one grade to the next until, he eventually drops out is a little concerning. So,
Mhm. Yeah, it feels like he kind of just got adrift, I guess you could say.
yes.
Yeah, so Ricky, he out of high school, he just made a living doing a lot of odd jobs. He mopped floors, he washed dishes, he was a busboy. He worked as an attendant at a gas station, and he also collected disability checks because he had chronic heart problems. He liked to do the graveyard shift a lot, and he developed a reputation as being a night owl. And his aunt would like give him the nickname she would tease him and call him the vampire. And I do wonder how like the chronic like staying up super late, how that affected his health. But we can get onto that later. So, and this is a little bit disturbing. I'm going to have to say, but Ricky ended up being arrested by the police in 1992 because he had relations with a 14-year-old girl, and he actually had two children with this girl, which of course I do not condone in any way and in any way possible. And while he was being charged for first-degree abuse, the public defender wanted to get him tested to see if he was mentally fit to face trial. The judge granted a mental health exam, but Enrique was seen as being mentally fit for trial. He pled guilty on September 1st, 1993. He spent 13 months only in prison, and he got home sent home a year early on a conditional release. So yeah, that was not something I really enjoyed having to read about. But like, do you think do you think that with with how he was as a child, like, do you think this could have been preventative, if he had having sexual abuse and stuff?
I do actually, to some degree. I mean, of course, it's always different to look back and see what could have been done, as opposed to, doing something in the present. And there's no 100% guarantee that Ricky would not have ended up on the same path as he did today. But I am of the strong opinion that a lot of times we're a product of our own environments. When you look at this particular case if you go back to what you talked about earlier, if you look at this particular case, he wasn't doing well, so he left school without reading. He didn't have according to reports, the education. He didn't have the proper writing skills to even do more than odd jobs. And then when you add that to the fact that he was a loner, he didn't have the support at home. And what's concerning is, like, while he was having this relationship with a 14-year-old, which started when she was 11, how comes no one intervened? Because I understand the girl was nicknamed Pretty Baby, but nobody actually said, you know what, this is not okay. This is a minor. Because this happened when he was 34. Like, when he was already in his 30s, and this girl was 11. So again, it's problematic when you got time, as somebody who covered corrections. I feel like one of the one of the main problem or shortage regarding the correctional system is that we don't really correct people. We don't really correct behavior. If he's incarcerated and you don't address all the other problems, then he's going to return to society and the behavior is going to continue. But when you talk about his heart problems, I don't know where the source of that is, because what's not clear if it's family, if he was born with a heart problem, if this was something that was developed due to how he ate, or whether his love for caffeine, which started when he was 10, because caffeine itself, I think Johns Hopkins University, John Hopkins All Children's Hospital, suggests that too much caffeine can actually cause other health problems. For example, increased heart rate, blood pressure, acid reflux, sleep disturbance. So I don't know if that could explain why he didn't sleep at night, or at least like to be up, because there's so many missing pieces in terms of filling the gap in his life to why he ended up on this path, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it kind of bothered me a lot to see him violate an 11-year-old young girl this much. But I don't know how mature he was mentally. I know how old he was, in age, but mentally, I'm not sure if he was fully there. Because there's so many, when you look at the mugshot, when you read the background, you're like, okay, where is he mentally? Because when you think about maturity, I know we don't talk about it. We think, a lot of times we equate age with maturity, and that's not always the case. I mean, it's for a long time while we start separating juveniles from adults, because the brain is not fully developed until someone is in their mid-20s, and that's assuming a normal childhood, normal development. But what about someone who is so who may have learning disability, who may have other health problems, or who may not be fully there? Because I know his brother and some relatives seems to suggest that he may have schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. So it's not clear, if he was fully there mentally. So that's another issue, at least, to add to the puzzle.
Yeah, like, I know, just it's just like we have so many questions about going on in his mental state. It's just like what has been confirmed and what has not, and yeah, it just raises more questions. Ricky, he continued, with odd jobs and whatnot. See, 2 weeks before Ricky died, though, he did stay in Orlando, Florida. Now, according to his girlfriend, I believe her name was Sandra Jones. Yeah, Sandra Jones. When he came back from that trip, he acted very skittish. She Yeah, it wasn't known who McCormick was meeting during his time in Orlando, and there were phone records that show that he and his girlfriend made a lot of calls to many people in Central Florida before he arrived. They had, they also, and Jones and McCormick themselves also exchanged short phone calls. He stayed in Orlando for around 2 days, and he made at least one phone call to the St. Louis gas station he worked at. His girlfriend said that she believed that McCormick went to Florida to pick up marijuana, that he was running drugs, and yeah, like when he came back, he acted very skittish, very like very nervous, and he would later go to a hospital and he complained about chest pains. So yeah, he went to a hospital to get checked, and I believe he stayed there overnight. According to some sources, he had experienced asthma and chest pains. Since, like you said before, since he was 10 years old, he drank several cups of coffee a day. He also smoked a pack of cigarettes a day. So when he first checked into the hospital, the doctors ruled out that he had a heart attack, but they did keep McCormick there for 2 days of observation. He left the hospital with orders to come back in the coming week. And before he, and after that, he went to visit his Aunt Gloria the day he left the hospital. He stayed around for an hour and he chatted a bit before he left. So we have that timeline down. And then the next day, June 25th, 1999, Ricky showed up at another hospital. This one was 2 miles away from the previous hospital. And he said he had trouble breathing because of mowing grass. And the doctors thought it was just an asthma flare-up. He wasn't admitted, and but he was released sometime in the next morning. So let me just get my notes in order. So on June 26th, Sandra Jones said that he called her on his way out of the hospital. According to her, he said that he was on his way to eat something at a gas station. The gas station employee told police he last saw McCormick there the next day on June 27th. And medical examiners determined that McCormick would later be dead that same day. So we have a lot of him just checking in and out. We have, him acting very strange, whether it was because of his health or if he was afraid of something. Like some people think that he was just including his aunt, believe that he was very nervous over something that happened in Orlando. What do you think, Dr. Dawkins?
A lot of a lot of things seem to point in that direction, and what his girlfriend reported should be viewed, favorably in the sense that if he was communicating with her, she must have some idea of what was going on. And so it's possible that he was really transporting marijuana or additional drugs, and something went wrong along the line for him to change his behavior. Or I don't know because I don't think he smoked cigarettes, but I don't believe he smoked marijuana.
No, I don't think he ever really did drugs from any reports I saw. Like,
It was just cigarettes, right? Cigarettes
yeah.
and coffee. So to go back to the original point, you talked about doing all these things at 10. That's before even getting to his reports of involvement in drug activity, or whether it's just transporting or just being a drug mule, whatever the reality was. At 10 years old, if he's doing that much, it means that there's a lack of supervision going on, or people weren't as attentive as they should have been to what he was doing.
Yeah.
It's not clear if they were just lax parenting in the sense that they knew he was doing it and they were fine with it. But
Yeah.
that caused for concern that he could start drinking, because it seems to be that his health problem coincided with when he started doing all these things at 10.
Mhm.
Although the reports are still questionable because we would need more evidence
Mhm.
to confirm that, but it appears to be the case that, a lot of his health problems coincide with his drinking coffee every day, and caffeine, as I mentioned earlier, has a lot of side effects when too much is consumed, and
Yeah.
then smoking marijuana. But going back to moving forward in terms of what happened in Florida, it's possible if he got there and he was communicating with Sandra's girlfriend at the time, it's possible that if he was talking to her or communicating during that time, she knew what he was doing, and he perhaps was indeed take transporting drugs, and something went wrong along that line because that's where the behavior changed.
Mhm.
And so when he came back, he apparently didn't talk to his aunt very long this time. He talked to her. I think he stayed for an hour, and the discussion was somewhat vague. It's
Mhm.
not clear if he was trying to hide from someone. That may have been a possibility. Although you went to the hospital one day and then stayed overnight and then went back the next day. So, and I think after then, maybe a day after he died or was
Mhm.
killed. So there's a lot of things there that tells us that something happened, and he was perhaps a little scared, and I'm getting that impression. Although with so much missing information, it's certainly
Mhm.
hard to pinpoint a specific reason, but the evidence seemed to suggest that something went wrong and he was a little bit concerned. Whether he used the
Mhm.
hospital as an excuse or not, it's difficult to say, but something went wrong and he was concerned about something. Because if he was
Mhm.
acting a little strange or skittish with his girlfriend and with his aunt, who he was supposedly closer to than his own mom, then, something went wrong there. And they're, in terms of causing him to react differently.
Mhm. Definitely. So, yeah, actually, yeah, his aunt, later stated that she felt that, when Ricky went to visit the hospitals, it was his way of hiding. And and, like I said before, the last June 27th was likely the last day he was alive because he was found in a cornfield. His body was found face down in a rural St. Charles County. So this was 20 miles away where he worked and lived. And what was very strange about where he was found was because he didn't own the car, and the area he in had no support for public transportation. So he had been taken there by someone's car. And so the land was also known as a dumping ground. Three women's bodies were also found in that area. In fact, there was one found prior to Ricky McCormick, and there were two bodies found 2 years later, where around the same area he was found. So, and it ended up being very hard to make an autopsy out of him. See, when he was alive, he was only 5'6", and he was very thin. So, but because his body was left out in the heat, his body was reduced to only 72 pounds, and and his body decomposed very quickly. So, yeah, they couldn't find anything proper to put there, and I had no idea that I think I grew up with a lot of those fictional investigations where I keep thinking, oh yeah, they'll find something. I guess I took that for granted. So I was
Yes. And I think a lot of us, if a lot of people get in criminal justice, for example, because they watch Law and Order, and you always solve the case there. You always know what's going on. Except real world cases are a little bit more complicated, like this one. But
like, yeah.
we do know from what you just mentioned that the position of the body, the season, in terms of the weather, um, all of these factors suggest that he was killed elsewhere. And
Yeah.
if he died on the 27th, it would have just been two. Um, the decomposition did not match the timeline.
Hmm.
In terms of how rapidly the body, and it's possible for the body to decompose and be in a certain state rapidly if depending on the weather. However,
Hmm.
based on the timeline and the weather, I think the 27th was June 27th was the last he was seen.
Hmm.
It indicates that he was killed elsewhere, and given how far this place was from where he lived and worked, it meant that somebody dropped him there. And they put him in that area because that area is supposedly known for dumping grounds. They have dumped. I think they found bodies before and after Ricky's death in the same area.
That's correct. Yeah. And yeah, I think this kind of like taught me like, okay, sometimes, it's harder to investigate what happened because of all these outside factors that came in.
Yes, and I think because of how decomposed the body was, and I think at the time when they found him, he was actually about 70 pounds.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
For somebody who's 5'6" and 70 pounds.
yeah,
So they had most, and I think one of the finger, I'm sorry to anybody listening, one of the finger was fallen off or in front of him. So
yeah,
it's like,
yeah. It was the fingertips that were
yeah.
like,
So and if someone, I think someone had seen him that day at the gas station, right? So if that happened, it means that somebody actually brought him to that location to, I guess, for someone else to find. And because of how their questions and they've been unable to solve this case because of how advanced the body was in terms of decomposition, so they couldn't define clearly what causes death. Because I don't think he had any stabbing wounds or anything outwardly,
yeah,
but we don't know if he was poisoned or anything because they couldn't. The autopsy was inconclusive. But clearly, based on, and is it possible that he died near someone and they decided to dump him there or leave him in an area where his body decomposed quickly? It's possible. But I know they're key players, so.
yeah. I think, yeah, I know that I think there was this, and I think this was like misinformation too. I think I saw someone saying like, oh, they found a gunshot wound. I'm like, how can they find a gunshot wound and then like, and then classified as not determined? I think that's just internet, just being the internet. Because like all the official articles I've read never mention anything about a gunshot wound. So I'm
Yeah.
like, so I think we'll just blame that one on the internet because otherwise it seems they couldn't find any conclusions with his body.
Yeah, based on the reports, it suggests that they didn't find any outward wounds, any stabbing or gunshot wounds. So it's not clear if he was possibly poisoned because since the autopsy couldn't determine that, or if since he had heart problem, if he died near someone and they didn't want to be blamed for it, if they decided to get rid of the body elsewhere. So I mean, it's hard to know without having conclusive scientific evidence saying, this is how this
Yeah,
person died. But I think the FBI seemed to suggest that it was a homicide based on all the other factors.
yeah. So this whole case was very quiet. They couldn't find any, leads or anything. This case pretty much went cold. And then 12 years later was when the FBI revealed that there were two handwritten notes that were in his pocket at the time of his death. They were, and I'm going to show you what they looked like. They were basically a jumble of letters and numbers that had like no coherent message whatsoever. It looked like some sort of code, and the chief of the FBI's cryptanalysis and racketeering records unit, which, by the way, I had no idea existed, and the more you know. Yeah, the chief of the CRRU, Dan Olson, he pleaded with the public to try to figure out this code. So Dan Olson was a forensic analyst, and when the notes were first brought to his attention, since then, since he's been promoted and all that, he still couldn't figure out what the code stood for. To quote, "It doesn't happen often that we have an unsolved cipher of this length and significance. The characters are not random. There are many E's, for example, that could be used as a spacer. There are many characteristics that suggest it could be solved, many patterns. The problem is we don't know why it's not solvable." So a lot of people argue that there's likely no meaning to these words. Olson himself maintains that these notes could contain leads about McCormick's death. And the FBI, tried all sorts of things. They went to the American Cryptogram Association to figure out the codes, but there were no breakthroughs. And there had been so many responses to these codes that the FBI had to make a website specifically to get tips or suggestions from the public, like what these could mean. Some people think that these could be vehicle ID numbers and to addresses and directions. And other people are thinking, this man was mentally ill. These probably don't mean anything. And these are just whatever made sense in his own head. Here are the codes in question. Yeah, like I think what was really caught my nose is how the writing looks very tight. Like I feel like I am not a cryptanalyst or anything whatsoever. This is my own civilian eyes looking at this, but the handwriting looks very neat but very cramped. Like some was mostly because my handwriting's a little similar to that. But
Okay.
yeah. What do you think? I mean, I don't think we're gonna solve the code today, but they are
Um,
interesting to look at.
I should admit to everyone listening, I have no idea about how to analyze code. I have no background in cryptanalysis, just to be clear. I think one thing that's not clear from the reports is they were found on him, but it's not clear if he wrote them. And if he did, I don't know if he knew, because the early report suggests that he couldn't read or write very well. And I don't know, the only thing that suggests that it may indeed be a code and could lead to conclusion about death and how he died is the inclusion of numbers. Because those are not, they don't appear random, okay, based on the placement of numbers. But it's not clear to me if, given his apparent inability to read and write well, if he indeed wrote this code, if he write based on what he hears. For example, someone who is not quite as literate may write based on how things sound to them. And so I don't know if we, in terms of if the word here is an F, if it should be E or any other letter, because it's based on their own interpretation. It's not clear if someone else wrote the code and gave it to him to deliver. Because if you recall, one of the things was that he was delivering or transporting drugs. So it's not clear if he misplaced something or didn't deliver something as he should, because he was supposed to transport these things. So it's not clear how the codes could be tied to that. So I think that part is unclear, but it's obvious that the code as is not quite random because of the placement of letters and also the actual numbers. How to try to solve it is a different issue to even know specifically what it means.
Yeah, I know that a lot of experts in cryptanalysis tried their hand in this. I think one of them actually helped solve some famous or cryptic, usually through art.
Yeah.
Unlike Olson, she believes that Ricky did not write these. She believes that maybe he was carrying these for someone else. Well, Dan Olson thinks that he wrote these, which I thought was very. Go ahead.
I would agree with that only because if everything in his background is true, then it would be difficult to know how someone with such limited writing and reading skills would be able to compose of such a complex notes that everyone else is struggling to solve. So I'm thinking I'm off this side that he didn't write it. It's possible someone else wrote it and he was supposed to deliver it to someone else, because if he was delivering drugs, maybe they were, whoever the key players are in that equation, someone was supposed to have gotten this.
Yeah.
And maybe
I think
they were hoping
I did the
that
same way.
this would send a message to that person. So
Yeah, so I ended up learning a lot about this case. Like, I had no idea that there was a specific department in FBI for these. It makes me wonder how often this happens, but it's pretty fascinating. I'm kind of fascinated by puzzles and stuff, so I think that's one of the reasons why I was drawn to this case.
I agree with you. Another thing that is a
Okay, here you
little
go.
trying to figure out is like, why did it take them, I guess you will cover this, so long to come up with this? Because you mentioned 12 years, and I'm like, what happened? Like, How comes this was not
Mhm.
reported before? So, and
Yeah.
you know, so
And apparently the family were not let known about this early on. So there were some misleading reports in the media that were claiming that the family, themselves say that McCormick had always been interested in writing complex codes. The family went forward and said, and they were pretty much adamant that this was not true. They never heard anything about McCormick keeping these notes. They were only told that he had an emergency room ticket on him at the time of his death. They actually didn't find out about the notes until they saw it on the local evening news. And they also say that they never knew him to write in code. He only jotted down quote unquote nonsense time to time, and he couldn't spell. The only thing McCormick could really write was his own name. And I saw some accounts from them where they just described his handwriting as scribbling. So I'm under the assumption that if he wrote, it probably wasn't decipherable, like these notes were. Dan Olson, though, he is very adamant that Ricky McCormick wrote those notes. He says, and I quote, "I have every confidence that Ricky wrote the notes. They are done in more of a format of something written to oneself than something written to someone else." Although that kind of leads me to think that maybe he's just carrying these for someone else. But yeah, that happened.
I don't
Go
really
ahead.
know what. I'm thinking if the family knew him as well as they say they did, they would probably be familiar with whether this was something that he had done, because they seem to be at least know what's going on with him, even when he was dating the minor. So I'm thinking if he could hardly write and didn't write as neatly, I'm thinking he probably didn't write it. He was carrying it for someone else. And given the condition his body was found in, it's not clear if they were ever able to do any get fingerprints to even look, to try to see or look at anything he had written previously to try to see, what, this looks like something he's written. Because I think
Mhm.
for us to say, what, he definitely wrote these things, we probably need to compare it to something else to see if the writing belongs to him.
Mhm. Yeah, and I do wonder if they've ever like really compared his handwriting, or because they wanted to solve this piece, but they haven't really said what else they used to figure this out themselves. So it's kind of
Yeah,
confusing.
I
But
agree.
yeah, this kind of ran into a lot of theories on the internet. And the internet, I have to warn you, sometimes they have legitimate theories that I'm like, okay, and then there's some that just kind of go to the more another level. So
That's true.
I made sure to just keep the ones that I feel were probably more than likely.
Hmm.
So a lot of people think it was because of he was killed because of his drug run. So according to his girlfriend, McCormick was holding drugs for Bob Hamdallah, who was a gang member around the St. Louis area. Hamdallah was notoriously violent, and he had been linked to several shootings at the time of McCormick's death. And Sandra suspected that the deal went wrong somehow, and that Ricky unfortunately paid for it. And, and authorities also suspected another local drug dealer who was named Gregory Lamar Knox. So Knox actually dealt with drugs in the same building McCormick lived. And Knox had trouble with the law and was already suspected for two murder for hire schemes. And there was a confidential informant that told the police that he had been seen killing a black man at a gas station and then disposed the body in an area that was close to where McCormick was found. So Knox was already in jail for some other things, and when he was asked about this, Knox said that he knew nothing about what happened to McCormick, and nothing else substantial could have been found after that. So, so a lot of people in the internet do feel that, like us, that McCormick was not the author of these notes. And like I mentioned before, a video game developer and cryptographer, Ilanka Dunin, she also maintained that she didn't believe McCormick wrote these notes. Her theory was that he was carrying the note from one party to another. And of course, like the third theory is that Ricky had a mental illness, and these notes came from that. Some people feel that McCormick may have had schizophrenia, paranoia, or bipolar disorder, and he was only writing these codes for himself to understand. And unfortunately, while his family suspected he had a mental illness, he had never been formally diagnosed, and the FBI is still adamant that the codes were not gibberish. And Dan Olson also was very firm, like, this does mean something. We look at a lot of things that are gibberish, that are arbitrary. This is not that case. Like, we've seen gibberish. This is not that. So, yeah, and basically after that, this case kind of went quiet again. Ricky McCormick was buried in an unmarked grave in Laurel Hill Memorial Gardens. But the notes themselves are still considered the FBI's top unsolved ciphers. They're not offering any money, but they are hoping that someone out there will be able to decode whatever these notes mean. And the question asks, like, were these notes integral to the case, or did they serve as a distraction? Because I feel like the Ricky McCormick's case only got looked at because of these notes, and somehow he ended up kind of being overshadowed by these notes. And I'm like, a man died. We should be more concerned about that. But,
I agree. Just for the record, I think the only challenge is because of so many missing factors in terms of how he died. Because they cannot get any conclusive evidence from the actual autopsy, it makes it a little bit more challenging. To say, what, we're looking for someone, because they don't have the evidence, and his actual physical body didn't have, say, outward signs of, say, a shooting or a stabbing or anything for them to say, what, this was certain. And, not knowing how he died, they know that the body got there because of someone else, because of the fact that there wasn't transportation in the area. It was 20 miles or so away from where you lived and worked. And that particular area was known for a dumping ground for, it was basically a lot of criminal activities in that area. So, I mean, that's one explanation. I didn't see a lot about Bob, how they followed that case. I know they followed Knox quite a bit, who denied involvement. But it was a lot of more circumstantial evidence in terms of, okay, he was doing this. There was a little bit of difficulty in terms of linking him to something specific to say, what, this is it. And I think that's part of the reason. And because the notes were found, I do agree that the notes are not gibberish. I do. Because I looked at it and I'm like, there are numbers involved. It's telling us something. What exactly? I wish I knew. But I agree that they're not just gibberish. They mean something. What? I don't know. But in terms of whether he wrote it, I don't believe that. Unless there's something else to compare it to. If he had written anything in the past, how does it compare to this? In terms of the letters, and I haven't heard anything regarding that. If it's possible, if he actually had a mental illness, and if I'm not mistaken, I know once his cousin Charles had mentioned that a psychologist suggests that he had a brick wall mind or something.
Yeah.
And I know the court, when he was charged, I don't know if you recall, they said he was competent to stand trial, which is not the same thing. Meaning he was okay during legal proceeding, but that doesn't go far enough in terms of how is he otherwise. He may be able to understand legal proceeding, but what does that mean outside of that context? So I don't really know how serious his mental health issues were. If he was schizophrenia or bipolar, maybe he could have written these things in one of those episodes. But without some comparison to something he has written in the past, it's really hard to say. But I do find his case fascinating for all the layers you mentioned. And also because I think, maybe a lot of what happened to Ricky McCormick Maybe what he did to that young girl and being involved in potential drug activities, maybe this was inevitable. But I feel like to a large degree, he was a product of his environment, not
Mhm.
getting any intervention when it mattered, when people realized things were not okay. Maybe things could have been different.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't have to be talking about his death or being overshadowed by, the
Mhm.
notes. But I mean, it's quite a fascinating case, and I agree with you in everything that you mentioned. I just think, you know what, maybe if we are a little bit more caring and attentive, we could have done a better job in terms of
Mhm.
changing the trajectory for Ricky McCormick, whether the teacher had intervened or the parent realized, he's 10, he shouldn't be smoking a pack of cigarette or drinking so much coffee at such a young age, or,
Mhm.
taking him to make sure we get an official diagnosis. Does he have a learning disability? If he
Mhm.
has a mental illness, how serious is it? I mean, because a lot of times, sometimes we just need an intervention when something's not okay to see what can be solved.
Yeah. I think like what you said just really like nails it on the coffin. Like I do not condone anything he did at all, of course, but I think just, the fact that he has an unmarked grave, it felt like, from when he was born into his death, that he was kind of just traveling and not adrift or something, I guess to put it that way. And it kind of makes me think about human nature that way. So,
Yeah, I agree. And that's part is sad. Like, usually somebody dies, you put a name on the grave, this represents somebody, but the grave is unmarked. It's like, who are you? Like, did you really matter? And I think what I'm sad, and I agree with you, I don't agree or condone anything you did, especially having relations with the young girl. And
mm,
as I mentioned earlier, it's not even clear how mentally sane or how stable, rather, he was. And it seems like the mother was familiar with the girlfriend, Pretty Baby, she was called according to
mm,
reports. So it's like, okay, why didn't anybody say, you know what, this is not okay? So, I mean, there are a lot of
yeah.
things that I think could have been done differently,
Mm.
but obviously we're not done. So,
Yeah. And well, I want to thank you so much for coming onto this. Like your commentary was very, very interesting to hear and very illuminating. Like, this case just has so many questions. Like, especially like, why was that okay? Why did,
well, thank you
yeah.
so much for having me. I'm glad I got an opportunity to have this conversation with you, and I learned a lot. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. And if anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to let me know. I think right now, I think we're pretty much good to to end this broadcast, but I think we've had quite a bit of people viewing us, so that was pretty fun. Yeah.
Thank
All
you.
right. All right. All right. Let me go ahead and thanks to everyone that was watching.